Lots of big news today. Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan is joining the chorus of Bring Back Our Girls. New numbers say luck is on the side of Republicans this midterm, and the Dems are pressing their luck with a Benghazi boycott. But will it grow into a man-cop?
New wave of violence in a country divided.
Ukraine is a country where the rule of law is being replaced by a mob mentality.
Both sides now talking about this as a war.
You're saying that you think that the Democrats should not appoint anybody to the special committee?
That's what I recommend.
There's a very loud, delusional minority that's driving our politics.
I do not know why any Democrat would want to participate in this.
A red herring and a waste of taxpayer resources.
The kidnapping of hundreds of children is an unconscionable crime.
Boko Haram officially claimed responsibility for the kidnapping of more than 200 Nigerian schoolgirls. The terror group opposes Western education, especially for women.
A horrifying accident at a circus in Rhode Island.
15 to 25 people were injured when the platform gave way.
That was absolutely horrific. Oh, my gosh.
And I'm feeling sorry, believe it or not, for the Speaker of the House as well. These days, the House Republicans actually give John Boehner a harder time than they give me, which means orange really is the new black.
First up, Benghazi, Benghazi, Benghazi. Even after 13 congressional hearings and an independent review, it is the scandal House Republicans can't get enough of. Now they've formed a new House Select Committee to look into the incident, an effort led by House Speaker John Boehner, with the committee itself to be led by Congressman Trey Gowdy. They're hanging the renewed outrage on an email from now Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes to National Security Advisor Susan Rice, a pretty standard messaging email ahead of her Sunday talk show appearances, which suggested she emphasized the protests across the region were linked to that anti-Muslim viral video that was enraging people at the time, which is accurate of those other protests, which are the focus of that email. That's why yesterday, California Congressman Adam Schiff proposed a Democratic boycott of further Benghazi proceedings. And it's why both sides of the aisle have serious misgivings about politicizing this.
This has been politicized like we've never seen before. There's a very loud, delusional minority that's driving our politics, that's in control of the Republican Party. There's no conspiracy here at all.
Anybody plays politics with Benghazi is going to get burned. So if we're playing politics with Benghazi, then we'll get burned. If our Democratic friends are shielding the administration and trying to protect them, and if the administration tried to protect themselves, their re-election, because they couldn't stand the truth about Benghazi, then they'll get burned.
Look, the deaths of 4 Americans on September 11th, 2012 was real. Very, very real. And the vulnerability of our embassies and our leadership on the Hill's failure to shore up those vulnerabilities are real. But is the scandal real, or is it just a distraction from those real issues? Joining me now from Washington is that congressman behind the boycott, Adam Schiff. Thank you for joining, sir. Congressman Peter King directly responded to your call for a boycott yesterday on Fox. Take a listen to that first.
I have a great regard for Adam Schiff, but I think he's entirely wrong here. If the Democrats boycott this committee, refuse to take part, the American people are going to conclude, and I think quite rightly, that they feel they have something to hide, that they cannot defend the administration.
Your response to Congressman King?
Well, Peter King is a friend of mine as well, and obviously we disagree about this, but whether the Democrats participate in the committee or don't, the reality is it is going to be a colossal waste of time and taxpayer money. And even worse, it's going to divert us from the focus that we really ought to have, and that is bringing these people to justice. All of this is lost in this effort to find this conspiracy to somehow embarrass the White House. We still have a lot of work to do to bring these people to justice, the actual killers of American citizens. So I think it's a terrible distraction any way you slice it, and I'd like to see us get back not only to the right focus in terms of bringing people to justice, but also not lose sight of what the country really wants us to work on, and that is creating jobs, improving the economy, raising wages. I have to conclude, Ronan, that they feel with the enrollment numbers up, with the Affordable Care Act, with the economy now starting to finally pick up, that they've got to go back to their old tried and true red herring on Benghazi.
Well, look, I think there are elements of the right wing that have sincere concerns about this, but the problem is those concerns are, as you say, a distraction from the real issue here. One of those real issues that troubles me most is that there are underlying questions about how we secure our American workers around the world. Actually, the independent review board commissioned by the government to investigate the attack found security at the Benghazi compound was really, quote, grossly inadequate. They really highlighted this security issue. Whose fault was it, first of all, that the security was so insufficient at that outpost?
Well, I think there's shared responsibility for why there wasn't greater security, not only at that outpost, but at other of our facilities around the world. It's a responsibility, by the way, that's shared by the Congress, because the administration has often asked for more money for security than the current majority has been willing to provide. So there's plenty of blame to go around on that. And Ronan, I think you're absolutely right. This is the other area where we have lost focus, in addition to bringing the people to justice. And that is, where are we on implementing the recommendations of that bipartisan accountability review board? And the fact is, I think we are making great progress in implementing those recommendations. And I would certainly support, a hearing to see how that is going.
So
again,
let's talk about the substance of those recommendations
here.
a little, because I share that frustration that seems to have been almost lost in this debate, the actual substance of what needs to be done to prevent this from happening again. First of all, there's this issue of whether there were enough resources. I just want you to weigh in, because there's a Republican element that is strident about saying too little resources, too few resources was not the issue here. What do you say to individuals like Darrell Issa, for instance, who are adamant that that's the case? This wasn't a resource issue.
Well, really, it obviously is a resource issue to some degree when you have the administration asking for hundreds of millions more to protect our facilities than the Congress will give them. At the same time, there may be particular vulnerabilities at specific facilities, and that may be very much the case in Benghazi. I think one of the terrible tragedies here is that Ambassador Stevens really loved the Libyan people. He loved serving there. He wanted to be close to the people. I think that he would be mortified to see what has gone on in his name ever since. And the challenge that we have, quite plainly in this arena is we don't want our diplomats to live in bunkers. We want them to be safe, as prudently safe as possible, but they need to be able to interact with the local populations or they can't be effective. And finding that balance is a great policy issue and one we should be discussing and debating, but one that has been lost in all of this.
It's a great challenge for diplomats all around the world, and I've worked with Chris Stevens. He's certainly someone who wanted to be out there amongst the people as much as possible. He was a great public servant. But on this question of resources, you mentioned Hillary Clinton was actually one of the individuals who went to the Hill again and again and asked for more money for embassy security and was then rebuffed by Congress. In 2011, just 1 year before the attack, she warned that cuts to embassy spending would, quote, be detrimental to America's national security. I actually covered this issue for The Atlantic in a couple of columns. One of the things that I found was in 2011, House Republicans cut $128 million from the administration's requests for embassy security funding. That really laid the foundation. First off, do you think Republicans erred in cutting those resources at that time?
Well, absolutely. And you're right. Secretary Clinton has been very outspoken on the need for those resources and to avoid exactly what we saw took place. You can't have that kind of a massive underinvestment in security and not expect it to be a problem somewhere. Now, the question is, can you predict exactly where it will be a problem? And the answer is no, of course you can't. But plainly, when you underfund to that degree, it's going to have consequences.
But, sir, the other thing that strikes me is that this is something that both sides of the aisle have been responsible for. It's also true, for instance, that in 2010, Democrats cut $142 million from those security requests just the year before that. So this is really a back and forth, and it actually seems like, in my view, if you look at the history, both Democrats and Republicans are guilty of this. Passing the buck, it's easy to gain political plaudits by saying spend less around the world, and then it leads up to these tragedies. Do Democrats deserve some of the blame for cutting embassy spending?
Well, like I said, I think there's plenty of responsibility to go around. You'd have to look at the particular year, though, Ronan, that you're talking about, because often what happens in the appropriation process is if money is allocated 1 year and it can't be fully utilized because the plans for a particular embassy aren't as far along as anticipated, then the subsequent year there may be not the same requirement for the same level of funding because you have those pent-up unused resources. So I don't know that I could answer any specific year, but I can say that I think Congress, and it's a shared responsibility among the parties, has needed to make a better investment, needs to make a better investment in embassy security, and unfortunately, as a result of that, the lack of that investment, we have these problems.
And it's something I've seen firsthand at a lot of the most sensitive posts we have in the world. There just isn't enough security. And you mentioned where we can spend the resources that we have. One of the big shortfalls, I think, is how we allow resources to be allocated to temporary posts like this post in Benghazi. That's bureaucratically what it was known as, even if it was in fact a covert post. Apparently, standard building funds weren't able to be used there. One of the recommendations you mentioned from the Oversight Board was that there be more flexibility in those rules about where those overseas building funds can be applied. Do you see any push on the Hill in the coming months to actually implement that kind of a recommendation and get the money to the Americans that need protection at posts like this?
Well, I would love to see that happen, Ronan. It's going to be a challenge, though, because there's often resistance within the GOP majority for giving any branch of the administration flexibility to use resources as the administration may see necessary. So giving the State Department that kind of flexibility to move quickly, that may be tough to come by. And, frankly, that would be a far more productive path of investigation inquiry for us on the Hill than yet another investigation of a conspiracy theory on Benghazi. But you're right, that would be very useful. There were, I think, more than a couple dozen recommendations by the Accountability Review Board that we really ought to be investigating, see how we're pursuing on them, where the shortcomings are. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if most of the shortcomings we end up concluding are within the Congress itself.
Right. This is exactly it. It takes more effort. It doesn't win as many cheap political points, but there are underlying things that could change here to save lives. Thank you so much, Congressman Adam Schiff. Appreciate your work on this.
You bet.
And up next on RF Daily, Nigerian Islamists kidnap over 300 schoolgirls they believe shouldn't be educated. But just who in this sad story really needs schooling? Stay with us.